I think of the life of a miner who must work all his day underground, where his lamplight is all that will shine there, and it's dark and it's damp all around. It is 2 or 3 miles to the coal face, and the tunnel is jagged and low, but he cannot find work on the surface, so it's down in the mines he must go.
Welcome back to the Urigna Mining Experience, where we're joined by Michael Leydon as we look back on his memories of the years of the Urigna coal mines. And of course, Michael, your family absolutely synonymous with coal mining. Your late dad, Micheál, would have been, I suppose, for the want of a better description, the main man in Urigna when it came to coal mines for many long years. Give me your memories, what it was like growing up as a young lad in Urigna and the family so heavily involved in mining.
Probably the first thing I'd have remembered is the pit phone, because that was there was an internal phone system, and when there was any trouble in mines, the pit phone used to go off, and that would be any time of day or night. So Dad would disappear. He'd go off, get dressed, and he'd be gone. And when I got older, I actually realised Dad used to get up before the phone even rang. He'd know somehow that there was trouble. And it was only years later I actually realised it was when the coal cutter was working well, the lights used to flicker down in the valley. And as soon as they stopped flickering, he knew that the coal cutter had stopped. So there was trouble. So that was probably one of the first of the memories. But there was always, the house was incredibly busy, and with the colliery office and the shop and stuff, there was always, but we thought that was normal, that you had,
because let's pick up on that point for a minute. And I can remember growing up and living in Great Nagloth at the time. And when you came to Leydon's, obviously you had the shop. God be good to Vincent O'Brien was working there, Mr. O'Brien as everyone referred to him. You had the post office, you had the telephone exchange, you had the colliery office, and you had a kind of a hardware animal feeds across the roads. Yeah. So there was so much going on there. It was a real hive of activity.
And you had people like Tom and Willie Keegan as well.
That's right.
And then you had Bridie in the exchange, and you had Tess, and you had... Yeah. And out in the colliery office you had...
And God be good to the Flanagans used to work as well there. Yes. Flanagans, remember Paddy Flanagan's daughters?
That was Bridie. No, yeah. And, no, yeah. So, and there was always... there'd always have been 4 or 5 working out in the colliery office at any one time, and then that was where the pays were done. So you had the in those days, before we computerized in about 84, but before that the wages were prepared every 2 weeks, but there was a sub given 1 week and the next week, and it was all done in cash. So that was so it was kind of a rough figure would be given, and then the full and then you always had, anytime anybody had a problem, you'd hear the doorbell ringing and somebody would be looking for a sub for that. But it was...
I presume the house as well, with people calling, and we've heard it a few times on the interviews here as well, that the whole interview process for a job was go up and see Micheál Leydon, knock on the door for a couple of minutes, and he'd tell you, who are you, who's your dad, who are you related to, I shall come up tomorrow.
It wasn't even that formal at times. There was, I remember somebody telling me that his father started him the job, and Dad was going around and goes, "Who are you?" And he said, "Oh," I pointed out who he was, and his father gave him the start. That it didn't even go as formal. Right. I know particularly in the latter years it became. Dad was trying to discourage the younger men from going in just because it was running out of time. So it was, in the earlier days, it was actually quite hard to keep shifts full and keep and each pit had such and there was an awful lot of different jobs around the place. So there was always something. There was always a slot somewhere that was
Yeah.
to be filled.
And your dad, obviously coming from a huge engineering background, would have probably been an advocate for education as well. When he knew maybe the time of the mines were coming to an end, he was probably anxious that these guys pursued an education career rather than go into the mines. But that was difficult when the lure of the money was there to get them to make that decision.
Yeah, and it must have been in about the 1970s. He had a scholarship system, and several of the lads took this. Went at Low, and there was a mineral science course, which was basically an engineering mine. And Dad was very instrumental in getting that course in Athlone. So he had a scholarship system for here and over in Rossmore, that for anybody, any local lad who went and did that course, there was a scholarship for that. And several of the local lads did it here.
The stories are varied and well documented of your late father's, I suppose, magnificent engineering mind.
Yes, he was an exceptional, and I met several of his friends from engineering afterwards, and I think he was very, very good engineer. And it was funny, he was fully ambidextrous, so when he was doing his mechanical drawings and even the drawings of the mine works, he was able to fully do them with both hands. He did his mechanical and electrical engineering in UCD in Dublin, and after that he went to Scotland and did his mine management course there, and he finished that in 1947. So that was the year the coal board was set up in the UK. So a lot of his very good friends ran coal mines throughout the UK, and actually one of his best friends was Arthur Scargill's technical advisor. So it was funny, he used to follow there was regularly, there'd be groups of coal board mine managers come over here, and what was very interesting was they no longer understood the figures from their own industries. They only looked at one part of the thing. So here, Dad had to know all the economic side of it. He had to know all the technical side, and to a degree the HR side. And I think that's quite unusual in the world now.
It was, and you know, the whole safety aspect, and no, health and safety is probably bigger today, but he had to keep the mines running in a very safe fashion. And again, it's come through here, Michael, an awful lot in the interviews that we have conducted. It was dangerous work, but yet there was relatively small number of accidents.
Yeah, another thing to remember too, that Dad was the only, pretty much the only mine manager around, and the mining acts said that every mine had to have a mine man. So he did mine management for all the other mines in the Rigna as well, and he did it for the ones down in Castlecombe as well. He was there, so he was pretty much, because he believed in the industry hugely. Yeah. But that thing about the mining acts are very different than the factory acts, and in the mining acts it's more an apprenticeship scheme, because the problem is you can't make mining too safe, because every day it's different rock and it's different, you know,
the dynamics change.
The dynamics change. Yeah. You have bad roof in place. If the roof gets, if the rock gets very wet, the grip between the layers breaks down, and it gets sort of a wet pit.
Talk to me a little bit, Michael, about maybe to tell you about any modern CEO or any business owner, that there goes a lot of pressure with such a role. You're responsible for so many families working and livelihoods and wages coming in. Your dad, if you took into consideration all the men he had working in the mines in its heyday, the shop, the post office, everything that went along those lines, did he ever show signs of that pressure, or was that when he was at his happiest, when he was in that environment?
No, there was. I think it's a big reason that stuff like the fishing was so important for him. It was the one
that was his way of relaxing, was it?
Yes, and it was the way he had a group of men friends that used to come down, and they were all highly intelligent. And there was one of them that was also miner, and an awful lot. The big and another one, and the advice he got from them, it was kind of we forget nowadays that the networking back then was 1-to-1. And another, the stress was brutal at times. The injuries were one thing that he just and it's and the thing you forget too is that he wasn't just a manager. A lot of the people in the mines we were related to, and they were friends of his. So, and he knew their fathers and their grandfathers. So it wasn't
a strictly employee-employer relationship.
Yeah.
He was living in the community. He was related, as you mentioned, to so many people there. And it was a family-owned business. Himself and his brothers were heavily involved.
He was on the EU Mine Safety Commission for about 25 years. And every country, and before that, if you remember, the EEC, its predecessor was the Iron and Steel Community, went before because the attitude was that if they combined them throughout Europe, countries would know what the other countries were doing if they recorded all the iron and stuff. And we were involved in that from the early stages. But Dad was very involved in the mine safety at the European level. So he was probably one of the longest serving because you had a civil servant and you had a union official from each country. Yeah. And I remember Dad being appalled by an awful lot of managers and the people he was dealing with had absolutely no practical knowledge. Yeah. They had never been down a mine.
And he had all this experience.
And I think most people in the mines knew he could do because part of the mine apprenticeship for the mine management was you had to do every job in the pit. Yeah. And every man knew he could do each job.
You had to know inside out.
And I think that's a huge problem we have with management nowadays. We have people who just go to college and they never actually do anything on the ground. So they have actually no idea of how difficult a job is. Yeah. And Dad had a huge respect for the job and the work that was done. He never and he
took for granted any of the roles.
He made sure that we understood that not to take it for granted, that it was tough bloody work, and so we would have all been brought down, and there was never an illusion in the family that it was, that.
Apart from the fishing, did he do shooting or anything else?
Yeah, actually it's quite funny because the mining rights and the shooting rights were often on the same parcel land, so we had huge shooting rights. So, and on that he was fascinating. He definitely had a huge love of nature. So it was, it's funny. I found afterwards that an awful lot of the people I know through the mining were actually, I think perhaps because they actually saw the destruction mines could do, they actually had a bigger appreciation
of nature.
I think of the life of the miner who must work all his day underground, where his lamplight is all that will shine there, and it's dark and it's damp all around. It is 2 or 3 miles to the coal face, and the tunnel is jagged and low, but he cannot find work on the surface, so it's down in the mines he must go.